On a frosty morning in early January, members of the Virginia Master Naturalists High Knob chapter make their way up a wooded hillside at the Southwest Virginia 4-H Center outside Abingdon. The group is here to help the 4-H Center install tree taps so it can begin producing maple syrup. The High Knob chapter began its own syrup production efforts with 35 to 45 of its own taps installed 6 years ago on the Powell River project in Wise County. Since those initial taps, the group has expanded its efforts to include tapping black walnut trees in Pound and Powell Valley. Several commercial syrup production efforts are also ongoing in the Wise County area. Today, we're talking with Phil Meeks with Wise County Cooperative Extension and Chris Allgyer with the Virginia Master Naturalists High Knob chapter about these efforts.
The High Knob Master Naturalists started in 2016, assisting Phil Meeks, the extension agent, in learning to tap maple trees. We tapped about 40 maple trees at the Powell River project that first year. We used buckets and just some simple tubing, and ended up making, after a few hit and misses, making some nice maple syrup. The second year of the project, we started using tubing lines to run the sap through the lines down to a collection barrel, and we found that that process yielded a lot more sap than just using buckets, and much easier to collect. We started in 2016, 2017, 2018. We continued with making maple syrup. We started branching out also to tap some walnut trees, and thought that we can make syrup from walnut. It turned out pretty good. In fact, the taste test that we did at Mountain Empire with folks at Home Craft Days, they seemed to prefer the walnut syrup. We also started that year hosting a tree syrup school. We did that at St. Paul. Then we continued for a couple years. Last year we had to do it virtually, but that's been a good success in making folks in the region aware of the potential of making not only maple syrup but also walnut syrup. The process of making maple syrup, of course, is that you have maple trees. You start tapping the trees. We found in Wise County the tapping time is first or second week in January. Here I have an example of a tap or spile. We drill a hole 5/16 inch and gently tap the spile into it. We drill about 1.5 to 2 inches, tap this in, and then run the tubing down either into a simple collection bucket, or if you're doing extensive number of trees, we run these into tubing collection lines, and so we can have several trees feeding into one main line that then the sap flows down into a collection site or collection barrel. The season we found lasts through January, February, and generally ends around here by early March. The process of what makes the sap flow is temperature related. We need temperatures at night to fall below freezing, in which case the roots of the tree will force water up into the tree, and then if the following day it warms above freezing, say in the upper 30s or 40s, then the sap starts flowing back down. It's a process that allows the sap to flow. So we have to have those kind of days. If it stays below freezing for a long time, you're not going to get much sap flow. If it gets too warm, you're not going to get much sap flow. We really need those ideal conditions, and for us those times generally occur in January through February. The other thing you should know is that it takes a lot of sap to actually make the syrup. It's approximately, we found that we're averaging about 50 gallons of sap will eventually boil down to make 1 gallon of maple syrup. we collect sap from any maple tree. We've been usually doing sugar maples and red maples, but you can also tap silver maples and box elders, which are in the maple family. So that's the outline. So once you get your sap collected, you need to keep it either refrigerated, or we sometimes will freeze it until we have enough available, and then you get yourself a big pan, build a hot fire, and start cooking it down. As I say, that's a lengthy process at times.
Since 2016, we've had several people who have tapped maple trees for the first time. I remember we did, when we first started this out in 2016, we had 14 families in Wise County who made syrup on some level. And most of them, you were talking about 10 taps or less. A few people got into it commercially, and at this point I'd say we have at least 3 commercial producers here in Wise County. And as you go out from the county, there are commercial producers, fairly large ones over in Electric County, Kentucky, over in Harlan County, Kentucky, Tazewell County, Virginia, and of course down near Damascus up on White Top, there's a fire department that has been producing maple syrup for several years, and they do that as one of their primary fundraisers for the year. Looking at Virginia as a whole, of course, the classic example of a maple production area is Highland County. They have a maple festival. They have several producers with 1,000 or more taps. But there are also pockets of maple production in Giles County, Montgomery County, and now Wise County. We have some producers. Well, according to the U.S. Forest Service, we have somewhere around 700,000 sugar maples in Wise County that are large enough for tapping, and over 1 million red maples that are large enough for tapping. And the minimum tapping size is about 10-inch diameter at breast height. So we have the trees. Now, not all of those are accessible, but a lot of people, they will have maples on the slope behind their home, probably in a wooded area that they're not using. And so there's a possibility of them making use of those, either maybe syrup for their own use, or possibly on a small scale commercial production basis. So we do have those around. Red maple especially is a very common tree, but we have some higher elevations where here in Wise County where sugar maple is very common, and you can find large stands of sugar maple. With the black walnut, we've noticed with a lot of our site visits, especially this year, as we're out and about, almost every farm has a few black walnuts. So that's something. We have an agribusiness person and a researcher at Virginia Tech who have really taken an interest in black walnut syrup production, and there's some work being done on seeing what's possible with that. I know in one survey that West Virginia University did, the going price per gallon for black walnut syrup was over $300. So, and the thing is, black walnut syrup is something that they can't produce in Vermont and New Hampshire and Quebec. It's something that we have here. It's a unique tree, and as I said, a lot of the farmsteads have several black walnuts around. So that's a real good possibility of a unique Southern Appalachian product that we could focus on.
So recently, a PhD candidate in Virginia Tech's Department of Forest Resources and Environmental Conservation shared some historic agricultural census data with us for Wise County. So in 1870, there were 3,798 pounds of maple sugar produced. In 1880, there were 525 pounds of maple sugar and 426 gallons of maple syrup produced. By 1930, no maple production was showing up in the census. However, in the surrounding counties like Russell County, in 1900 there was 31 gallons of syrup and 480 pounds of sugar produced. And then in Sullivan County, there was 79 gallons of syrup and 420 pounds of sugar in 1900.
If folks get interested in syrup production, whether it's maple syrup or walnut syrup or sycamore syrup, they can contact the Extension office in Wise, and we can help them through the process. It's actually very cheap to get involved in, especially if you're using buckets. And most people the first year they want to use buckets, and then they would graduate to the tubing systems. But for anybody who wants to do that, we'll be glad to work with them and tell them what they need to buy, and even demonstrate how they need to install those taps. And in the process for cooking that down and bottling that syrup, we can help them with that. We also, Chris has mentioned the tree syrup school that happens in November. That's usually the Saturday before Thanksgiving. There'll be a lot of information for both beginning and advanced tree syrup producers, so that's something worth attending. But I would say have your gear ready to go by Christmas, and right after the first year, that's when you'd be installing your taps. If folks are interested in buying Wise County maple syrup, they can contact the Extension office. We have people, they have various outlets. Some people will sell from their home, some will sell at various market outlets. There are some people who place syrup in various retail shops here in the region. So it would just be a matter of finding out what's still available, where that syrup is still on the shelves, and we could point people to where they could find Wise County produced maple syrup.